okay to sit, and then I can swap in when I come in? Yes. Would you like to sit? I can sit there until it's nice and okay. Yes, here.
Who's the first speaker?
They make it work.
Yeah. Who's the first speaker? Then if.
And then you'll pass it to Joanne.
Yeah, that's a much better way of doing it, I think.
Okay, hello everybody. So I think we're going to get started, even though we're hopeful that some of the people who disappeared for the coffee break will come back. So welcome. I'm Rebecca Granado, and I work for Bard College, and I also direct what are called the Open Society University Network Hubs for Connected Learning Initiatives, which open up access, higher education opportunity access for refugees globally, along with my colleague here, Joanna Zimmerman from Arizona State University, as well as BRAC University in Bangladesh. So as we've heard from other panels, achieving the goal of 15% by 2030 requires the coordination of multiple actors: funders, states, NGOs, UN agencies, and of course, university actors too. So what we're going to be talking about in this panel, which is called Bridging the Gap: Successes, Barriers, and Benefits of Post-Secondary Transition Programs for Refugee Learners. It's quite a mouthful. We're going to look at another critical aspect of moving refugees into higher education: student preparation. So even when all of the aforementioned actors align, in terms of supporting this move from into post-secondary programs, there are a number of contributing factors that prevent this ease of movement. So, for example, refugees attending secondary institutions, that use a national curriculum, as they do in the case of, for example, Kenyan refugee camps. Teachers often do not have adequate or possibly any training, and the classrooms can seat up to 150 students at one time. In other contexts, such as in the Rohingya camps in Bangladesh, the national curriculum is not accessible to refugees, and thus the vast majority of students are unable to access any secondary school opportunities at all. Poorly trained teachers, overcrowded classrooms, all of these challenges that abound in all of these contexts. What this leads to is that students are desperately unprepared in terms of their language abilities, in terms of their critical thinking and analysis skills, preventing them from moving into online educational opportunities at the post-secondary level, to third country education pathways, or even into opportunities within their host countries. So we have 6 panelists here and 45 minutes. It's a short amount of time. But what they're going to be doing over the next 45 minutes is sharing their experience in the different contexts and situations that they're working in, the ways in which they've built their programs to address some of these needs. We're going to be talking about best practices for designing these programs, including approaches to contextualization, as well as the advocacy that's needed to ensure that these bridging programs and transition programs can actually move students beyond their secondary educational experiences. So I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves right before they answer the first question, so that you have their bios fresh in your minds. And we are going to start with Raymond. And the first question that I think we'll tackle here is this question of why bridging programs? Why do this at all in these communities that are affected by displacement? So Raymond, over to you.
Thank you. Raymond Burton from One Refugee. I'm based out of the United States. And like we know, only 5% of refugees actually have access to higher education. And so there are issues when it comes to accessing higher education. There's access, like actually getting into higher education, but then there's also readiness. So those are kind of the two main barriers that you'll see the individuals who have experienced forced displacement, what they're dealing with when they're trying to transition into higher education. So you have low numbers accessing, and then you also have low numbers of those who are retained in college after that first year. So I just kind of want to walk through some of the barriers, and you'll notice here we all come from very different contexts. So mine is very US-centric. So I'm talking about individuals who have been resettled into the United States and are now trying to access higher education. But some of the barriers that these individuals face are language acquisition, especially for those who have been resettled into another country, digital literacy, and difficulty navigating complex academic systems within various contexts, pronounced reading and writing deficits, limited secondary education experience aligned to college readiness, lack of family assets, credit, or ability to fund higher education. And just want to point out that the lack of access to credit oftentimes has to do with the host country regulations as well. Lack of exposure to and information about career possibilities within their local economies. Mental health issues from past trauma, and limited access to treatment and the demands of social integration. Financial stress. Students, especially in the United States, are often the primary breadwinners for their families because they're the ones who speak English the best, and therefore they're the most likely to go to college, but at the same time they are the primary breadwinner because they can make the most income for their family. Family strain as they exercise new independence and individual making not typical in their family culture. Financial and emotional responsibility for family members both inside and outside their country of origin. Distance and travel to colleges and universities for those who might be in remote locations, and lack of electricity, Wi-Fi, and other educational resources that they would need to be successful. So just trying to paint a broad picture of the many barriers that individuals face and the need for bridging programs to help, again, in the areas of access and readiness.
Thank you, Raymond. So with so many challenges on the side of refugees in their countries of first asylum and the potential receiving countries or institutions, we have challenges ranging from just basic preparation to financial challenges, a whole host of challenges, psychosocial challenges. So Joanna, let's turn it over to you now, and maybe you can give us an overview of components of bridging and transition programs that will lead to successful implementation for students.
Thank you. I'm Joanna Zimmerman. I work for Education for Humanity at Arizona State University, and we're located in the U.S. in Arizona. And we are also fortunate to co-lead with UNHCR the Connected Learning in Crisis Consortium, of which many people I see in the audience are a part already. So if you have any questions about that afterwards, please let us know. And then also along with Rebecca, helping to co-lead the Hubs for Connected Learning initiatives as part of the Open Society University Network. And thank you for the question on components of bridging or transition programs. I would say, obviously, the bridging programs exist or are needed when there is a gap between the tools, capacities, knowledge sets, or formal requirements that a student currently has and those which will be needed to be successful in an academic program. So that can be, you know, a university degree, short courses, vocational training. So those types of programs that they're interested in pursuing can look a little bit different. But I would say with that broad framing, bridging programs can really take many forms. And so as ASU and Ed for Humanity kind of think about it, there's 4 main things that we try to think about. And the first is you should have an idea of what the program is bridging to. So, you know, what are the options for the student after completion? And this is a question, I have a little bit of a smile because the students will really push you on this. Obviously, students are not going to want to waste their time. They have very high opportunity costs for that time. And so you have to be able to answer the question of what will the student be prepared to do upon completing the program. And that should be very clear. The second is a clear set of entry requirements or capacities or knowledge that a student must have in order to be considered ready to succeed in the next step in that transition. So whether that's an academic program or even further along the road, a job. And I know the session is focused on higher ed, but what are universities, if not entities that are responding to workplace deficiencies and even, you know, what we're going to be expecting people to be able to do in the future in the workforce. And so transition programs may very well serve as bridges to the workforce as well. The third is a means of assessing where a student currently is with regard to those entry requirements or prerequisites. And I'm sure some of my colleagues will talk about this, but this can take many forms in terms of, you know, diagnostics, you know, comparing credentials, things like that. And then the fourth is a clear idea of how long it will take the student to complete that bridging program, and in turn, clear communication with the student about how much time they will be spending in that program. And so, as I mentioned already, students experiencing displacement experience very high opportunity costs in terms of their time. And so, you know, the decision to whether to pursue a credential, which often has a longer runway for payoff, versus an employment opportunity, which can help them and their family more immediately in the short term, is an important one. And I'll just end with an example of a bridging program that's co-led by Arizona State University and Bard College under the Open Society University Network umbrella. That's the REAP, the Refugee Higher Education Access Program. And it started in Kenya and Jordan, but it's now including Bangladesh as well. This bridging program offers English language training, as well as university preparation courses for students who are hoping to pursue courses online or university programs online, although the skills are very easily transferable to, you know, in-person studies as well. So those topics are digital literacy, conducting yourself professionally and safely online, communicating virtually via email with professors and your colleagues and students in your class, deciphering between trusted and unsubstantiated online sources, time management, and among other skills. The students start off with an English diagnostic because, unfortunately, when we realize that this is a limitation to our program at the time, our content is in English only. So students are starting off with an English diagnostic based on their score. They will move into the level that is right for them. They will then go on to take the university preparation courses, and then they will be supplemented with academic support for academic writing, and then move into the broader OSUN Hubs courses, which are all university courses at the tertiary level offering credit. And so that's just a quick example of a bridging program that's currently being implemented. But as I said, bridging programs can look many different ways, but those are just some of the components that we think about as we're implementing.
I actually have a follow-up question for you, Joanna, or anyone else who might want to jump in on this. When you're designing these programs, how do you take into account the higher education institutions themselves or other stakeholders that might need to be considered when you're designing specifically for them moving into higher education institutions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say the first thing I would start with is actually relevance to the student and their life. So before we even get to the higher ed institutions, I would say, is this program offering up a path that the student is interested in and is relevant for their current life? So we all know there are, limitations around work and things like that. So you would want to make sure that this is going to be relevant. But also for the point of higher ed institutions, I think it's a good idea to involve deans, faculty, make sure that you're preparing students to be successful in a rigorous environment. And I would say that we've kind of been in a lot of conversations with higher ed institutions and faculties for that very reason. So,
thank you. So that's one aspect of contextualization that needs to happen. So let's think a little bit more about contextualization, and we're going to turn to Peter now. So Peter, maybe you can tell us a little bit about some approaches that have made sense for JWL and other actors in particular contexts.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Peter Balais. I'm a Jesuit and I'm heading this organization, Jesuit Worldwide Learning, Higher Education and the Margins. It set out around 12 years ago with pilots in refugee camps in Kakuma and Kenya and Salek and Malawi, and then expanded with that challenge to make higher education accessible, to overcome the barriers and create bridges. Let me use this kind of scale of the UNESCO levels of education. So we talk now after secondary level 3, the 4th level is post-secondary non-tertiary education. And here, what has proven well is a language course. So we run English language programs together with curriculum from Cambridge, assessment, online testing with Cambridge assessment, and that is the very first step to enable students of different cultures, languages across the globe. We work in 19 countries and 46 learning centers, many in refugee contexts, to learn first of all the languages. This is also already a qualification. Then to enter the next level, like 5, where we have this is a level of short cycle tertiary education. We offer tertiary education as an alliance of universities. So an individual university offers a program. We deliver that via blended learning. In this context, it's the university which accredits students of that university, be it in Kenya, be it in the United States, here in Europe, or in India, so on. We have around 10 accrediting institutions. We have to think it as an alliance. So we developed short-term programs of 6 months, 3 courses, 9 credits, which are being offered. We call them professional courses. They train people in a specific skill like e-learning, learning facilitator, or web design, e-commerce, a couple of these skills which are practical, which are, even a course like Peace Leader is highly on demand in areas like conflict and so on. That is, it's like a next step. It's a stackable learning path. Many students do that. And then some go for a longer term course, which has been actually our very first program, a foundational program in liberal studies. Some people told us this is pretty useless in the refugee context. No, it hasn't proved. We did research. It is very useful. Out of 1,000 students who did that program in 10 years, 700 have finished it. That's our normal rate of finish completion, 70%. And they are all in works, and others are still studying. They have made their work. So we know from many students that took their credits and went to other programs. So we continue to offer that foundational year of 30 credits program now with an institution in India and so on. But also, I do think it is important on this bridge to offer bachelor programs. so that others can go then, those who complete that, to master programs which are easier, accessible online. So we have one bachelor program so far in sustainable development, and in that program around over 100 students are involved. So in that context, just to mention, of course, what has to be adapted, the technology, not every platform works in the context where we work. If you want to reach the excluded, you need to have a platform which is on and offline, and that's what we have developed for ourselves. It's also the pedagogy, which is very important, the learning, the way, and to have learning communities in the refugee camp and so on. One thing, reflecting as my last point, the best bridge to make higher education accessible are de facto now our graduates. In North Iraq, we started in Hanke camp with an English language program, then some did the professional courses, and some entered the bachelor program. The Yazidis have moved back to Sinjar Mountains. They have opened 2 new learning centers. They maintain the learning centers. We deliver the higher education. The fact that we have 800 students in Afghanistan is based on that principle. They stayed, they want to, that's their only chance to learn. We deliver via online, it works, they have internet, we help somehow that local organization, New Horizon, but they deliver it and they open de facto new centers and ask us, can we have there and there? Yes, we will support you. But again, even they have a program developed, each one teaches someone, so the 800 teach others, so they have around 3,000 younger ones who learn. So the students themselves are the best bridge to learn for their colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Peter. You know, I think you're making a really interesting point as well about replicability and scalability in relation to programs being able to move around and be replicated. But also it speaks to Ella's earlier point about quality. You know, if students are advocating for these programs, it really does speak to the quality. So thank you to all of you who have spoken so far with this kind of overview of what bridging programs do look like that are out there and some of the contextualization that's needed to happen. So now we're going to turn to think a little bit about some of the success stories of bridging programs and transition programs. So perhaps we can start with Karine and then we'll move to Andoni. And maybe you can talk a little bit about when programs are well contextualized and supported, what are some of the positive outcomes that you've noticed in your experiences?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Karine Burkhush. I'm a representative of Chiron Open Higher Education, an edtech non-governmental organization based in Germany with MENA offices in Jordan and Lebanon. I will be mainly speaking about the Lebanon context to give you more ideas about success stories of bridging programs in Lebanon. So Chiron Open Higher Education offers free online education on its platform, the Chiron platform, for refugees and underserved communities. We also have a bridging programs for students and refugees specifically who would like to transition from secondary education into higher education and universities. With this bridge program, we provide students with English learning courses, digital skills courses, preparation for the job market. And from here, I would like to draw also the attention for the DAFI scholarship program that we implement, that is a UN-funded scholarship that we implement in Lebanon for refugees to be able to access higher education and do their 3-year bachelor degree. With this DAFI scholarship program, we train the students and they have access to the bridging program, and then depending on the placement program that they are placed, they take the English courses based on their level, and then after finishing those courses, the students who are in their 3rd year, they would actually take CV writing, job preparation courses to be able to transition and not just get transferable skills, but also be able to access the employability market. So to answer your question about what are the success of this bridge program and what can students once enrolled in bridging program can benefit. First of all, the language acquisition that students are able to gain and be able to use in the job market. Second is, of course, the importance of digital skills when it comes to computer literacy, digital skills such as Excel, Word, that students are in need for that for the job market. And of course, the professional ability and the professional skills on interviewing and career preparedness. I will give now the mic to my colleague Andonai to also withdraw on more information.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for opening with that. My name is Andoni Martin. I work with the Refugee Studies Center at the University of Oxford, and we work particularly on a project called the Refugee-Led Research Hub. And so the work that we intend to do is sort of along academic bridging pathways to help people get into graduate programs, so supporting people to get particularly into social science degrees, whether it's at Oxford or other universities in the UK or throughout Europe, and then looking to expand a little bit more broadly as well. And then we also intend to support students and researchers get into the research fields and into leadership pathways. So in a lot of ways, it's a more sort of advanced, higher level bridging program that builds upon bridging programs that help people complete the secondary and tertiary level education. I think that Karine has covered a lot of the fundamentals of what bridging programs can do when properly supported. And I think by and large, they reflect what Raymond has suggested are some of the challenges, right? It helps you overcome language barriers. It helps you socialize. It helps you address some of the mental health challenges that you might have through psychosocial support that might be available through institutions. It effectively helps you to access resources. And that's, I think, what a lot of the successes are within all of your programs, and which my program really benefits from. So we're able to work with JWL and JRS students. We're able to work with Kairon students, with GEM program in Nairobi and Kakuma as well. So in a lot of ways, the bridging programs that can provide the foundations for success, whether it's along economic axes or higher education, leads into further bridging programs in a lot of instances. And it sounds a bit trite in some regards, but we're all working through our professional and academic trajectories. And so if done well, if the resources are available, ideally bridges can open up further opportunities for more bridging programs. So we're really delighted at Oxford to be able to work with so many students that are really looking, as you all have suggested, for further opportunities. And it's something where in this room there are a number of students that have a forced displacement background, whether as refugees, asylum seekers, internally displaced, stateless, or others that self-identify, that take part in our free online course in refugee studies, which is our entry point for onward pathways. But I think it would be really quite exceptional and wonderful to hear what others on the panel think. I think that we probably are quite good with time at the moment to sort of understand statistically or by numbers or anecdote what you all perceive to be quite successful outcomes of bridging programs. But perhaps we save that for after, whatever works well.
I think we have a couple of minutes to comment on that. And I know Peter was saying that, about 70% of their students managed to move on. But does anyone else want to comment on this question of what quantifies success? Is that kind of how you're asking, Andoni?
Yeah, or like the anecdotes that you have seen. And I think from the Oxford example, from our very first cohort of 12 fellows that were basically taking a bridging program to prepare for the master's level out of an applicant pool of 900 really strong candidates, many of whom came from your programs. 6 of them applied for graduate studies at Oxford. All 6 of them got their applications accepted, and so far 4 out of 6 of them have full scholarships. And it's very expensive tuition, right? It's not a particularly scalable model, but it becomes a more sort of elite, advanced academic opportunity. And for me, it's been an incredible proof point, and the university has been really quite surprised and excited to hear that this work that's sort of going on in a corner of the university is yielding such incredible successes that can translate thereafter into leadership roles, whether it's at UNHCR or whether it's within Oxford as a professor someday. So these are some things that we're sort of seeing successes in already and want to prepare for moving forward. So yes, from others it would be also quite welcome and interesting, but
does anyone want to comment before we move to the next question? Go ahead, Raymond. We'll have a 1-minute comment from
No,
Peter and
yeah.
from Raymond.
I mean, we did on these first 10 years with basically all refugees in Kakuma and Zaleka and some in Jordan and Iraq and some in Afghanistan research. What have they done? As I said, the quantitative research shows they all are in jobs, mainly in the camps with organizations or their own initiative. But we also did an impact, research on the community. What has their attitude changed, in terms of learning? And it's interesting goals we wanted to achieve in a way, but we turned out more successful. So there is a real change in critical thinking in the students, in their community commitment. That's why they stay and do some, take initiative. And also in question of intercultural, interreligious living together, which are sometimes even in camps, conflicts, or some of the conflicts they suffer have these kind of roots. So in the key areas and civic leadership, they are like, I heard now in Jinja, there was fighting again between the Iraqi army and some local group. Some of our peace leaders have done the call, went now for demonstrations, said we are tired of that war. We want peace. Peacefully. These are examples that people take initiative, the same thing like in Afghanistan. Yes, of course, more than 50% are women who study. Because they and the parents went, and the young men, to the Taliban and said, we want to study. So education helps people to make the changes in their context where they are. At least we have some evidence that it helps them,
Just along the same lines, I think that a lot of the students we work with feel like fringe members of society. And so one of the biggest indicators of success is just the increase in their confidence, their self-belief, and their feelings of belonging.
So increased participation in their communities and beyond, increased confidence, moving on to even higher forms of education beyond the BA level. So we've heard a number of successes. Now we're going to turn to the flip side and the negatives. So we're going to turn to Katie now. And maybe you can talk a little bit about the shortcomings and critiques of bridging and transition programs, of which there are many.
There are, yes. I think Raymond and I have a few points to make. I mean, I think the first point I'd make, I'm not even sure if it's a critique, but it just sort of has to be said, really, which is that... I didn't introduce myself. I'm so sorry. Yes, hi. I'm Katie Barringer. I work for Refugee Education UK. And the point I was making was that the demand far outstrips supply. There's just not enough of these. And I was talking actually just a few days ago to a bridging project in the UK, and they were telling me that they don't advertise it at all because they are so oversubscribed just by word of mouth, and have people, it's based in the south of the country, have people sort of getting up at the crack of dawn and travelling down on buses to take part. So I think that sort of has to be borne in mind when we're talking about all the amazing successes. There are so many people who don't know about these, and even if they do know about them, have no real way of accessing them. The other observation I wanted to make is actually that I think that sometimes the funding model for bridging programs, particularly those that are affiliated to universities, can be really can leave bridging programs in quite a vulnerable position. So what I mean by that is that although the bridging projects we work with are all to all extents and purposes their own sort of setup, they obtain their own funding, they have their own branding, they set up their own programs, but by and large they're dependent on the affiliated university to actually receive and administer the funding. And if that relationship with the funder is not prioritized by the university, it actually leaves the bridging program in a really vulnerable position, even if their outcomes are quite good. And I do know of examples where funding hasn't been continued, and that is not because the bridging program is not doing good stuff and meeting their outcomes. It's because the funder is finding it so frustrating working with the affiliated university. So that's not really a critique of bridging programs per se, but I think it's worth mentioning when we're talking about maybe some of the negative things. I'll pass back to Raymond now for a few more critiques.
I'm sure more people on the team can kind of share their thoughts. I've found in the US context that very few individuals who participate in bridging programs actually make the gains necessary to transition into higher education. And I don't know how much of that is just the US context, but it takes time, years, for many individuals to be able to make the gains necessary to actually succeed in higher education institutions. So, I think part of that might be kind of this idea of helping those who are designing bridging programs to understand really who their clientele should be. I think a lot of individuals developing bridging programs really make it very wide in terms of who they're targeting for their programs, and that can kind of be a hard thing for designers to wrestle with, to say no to some people, to really hone in on those who are the most likely to make those gains necessary to succeed. And then, I think that the other piece is just matching expectations, both of those in the bridging program, to say, not everyone is going to succeed in a 3-month bridging program and being able to transition, that it might take some more time. And especially when it comes to language acquisition, there's only so much you can do to help someone learn a language as quickly as possible. And so sometimes that's just a matter of it takes some time for someone to acquire the skills necessary to succeed in transitioning.
Yeah, maybe I need to specify a little bit. So I said we bridge to higher education, but these are not short-term programs. Students know for the English language to reach one level, they have to study 240 hours in 4 months. For the academic program, they know they have to do 20 hours a week, 160 hours in 2 months, and so on. And that is, we have to be clear about that. But the important is, the majority are, 2/3 are English language students. For them, it helps already to know English language. It's a professional skill in many places. Others do the short-term academic courses. Fewer will go to the bachelor. We experienced this organization in 2017 in Kakuma camp. The students said, your diploma has only 45 credits at that time. What is it? We needed to be able to offer them the perspective of a bachelor, to motivate them. And not everyone is going for it, but it's very important. So the package, the very short-term programs with no credits, just a paper of participation is not enough what the people need.
And I'll just make a quick comment. Do we have time?
We have a couple minutes.
Okay.
Yes.
On credentialing, because even though we're helping students be prepared for a university degree and experience, there are still very few universities who understand the situation with documents of many displaced and refugee students. And so we can get them ready, and many of them already are ready. But let's take universities in the US will still get that question of where is their high school diploma, even though we're past that and we've demonstrated that they're, showing these capacities and these, competencies. And so credentialing is an entirely different conversation, but I just want to raise that as a barrier as well.
And I think that's actually a good transition to our final question, which has to do with guidance that we might be able to give organizations, whether they're higher education institutions or NGOs, who are seeking to promote and set up and support students through bridging programs. So Katie, maybe we'll start with you, and then we can see if others want to comment as well.
Thank you. I think what I've heard sort of come through again and again, and it for me is so important, is coordination, partnership, dialogue, that bridging programs will not be as successful as they could be if they stand alone. So in my context in the UK, that's first of all about reaching out to the pre-bridging programs. Where are the participants going to come from? And making sure that you're really clearly explaining what are the criteria, what are the expectations. And that's partly so you can get the right people coming to the bridging program, but it's also so that you're diverting other people for whom this may not be the right pathway. And I think that leads on to another point that Raymond made that we certainly find, which is that there's a real lack of knowledge about routes forward and pathways. And so it's really helpful to build relationships with organizations that will offer sort of career advice, real pathway planning, to ensure that the candidates for whom the bridging programs are the best fit hear about those programs, but also to divert other candidates. And I think employment's really, really key as well. So university is not going to be the final outcome for everybody. And there are many organizations that offer excellent sort of wraparound support for employment opportunities, whether that's industry or whether that's other NGOs. And that's crucial, obviously, at the exit stage to have that sort of that pipeline, but also maybe earlier on to recognize the participants for whom actually it's not necessarily university that they are after. And then, of course, there's coordination with universities as well. So we've heard some of this to make sure that affiliated universities are fully on board, the credentialing and all the rest of it. And I think, in a way, I sort of see bridging programs almost being like a pipeline, and accessing universities one outcome, but that based on the individual's sort of personal circumstances, their ability, that there are other outcomes that are viewed positively by the participants, by the program, and I think quite crucially by the funders as well. And I think this also links back to an earlier point about the importance of choice for the refugees in the bridging programs, that as far as possible they're really able to choose a path that they're genuinely interested in and creates a viable future for them in the context in which they find themselves.
We have time for one final comment before we wrap up.
Oh, that's a lot of pressure. I was just going to say that I think in order to do this well, you really sort of have to work both sides, so the university side and the actual content student-facing side. In one of yesterday's conversations, we heard about the importance of universities acting as advocates and on behalf of the students towards governments. But remember that universities are actually very complicated ecosystems in and of themselves. So registrar doesn't talk to admissions, doesn't talk to, the faculty. And so you really kind of have to know a lot about the ecosystem in which you're working, and also, be sure that you have people kind of plugged in along the journey as a whole.
Manal has a question, and we can't deny Manal her question, so we're going to allow her to ask it.
I have a question. I was really interested in what Peter was saying about alumni, ensuring that the learning opportunities are ongoing, for example, in Afghanistan, and we know that there are guidance and counseling opportunities and services being offered in Kenya, being offered in Lebanon, being offered in Ethiopia, etc. And I wanted to ask the colleagues in the UK and in the US if there is a role of refugee youth and refugee graduates in doing all that navigation that you're talking about, right, Carrie, between admin and financial aid and et cetera, or between the bridging and the university to get over some of those really, really tough moments. Over.
Absolutely. I think one of the exciting things, we've been in existence since 2014, so we're still fairly new, but we're now to a point to where we have 350 graduates who have graduated with degrees, and we have this vast alumni network that we can tap into, and they're now acting as professional mentors for the students who are currently in college. So you're seeing this real connection and this sense of community coming from these individuals who are just starting college as freshmen, being able to connect with someone in their field from their same background. So it's really powerful. And then taking that even one step lower down to the bridging program. In Idaho, we have a high school bridging program that leads into our college program. And so our college students are acting as interns for that bridging high school program. So starting as early as sophomores in high school, some of these individuals are gaining access to kind of a vision of what the future could hold. So
Katie, do you want to make one final comment?
I mean, my comment would be yes, absolutely. It's anecdotal really, but I have an amazing colleague from a refugee background who's studying to be a doctor, and it's extraordinary, the inspiration. So many of the young refugees we work with do want to be doctors, and it's extraordinary, the inspiration of seeing his pathway gives to other people. I mean, I think that the refugee voice is incredibly important. I do also pick up on Joanna's point about how complex universities are. And again, I think for me, it's about different people, different institutions working together. So you have the refugee voice, but you also have people from universities maybe making that a little bit more accessible. You have NGOs support. And I think together, that's where bridging programs are really the most powerful force they can be.
So while our panel was talking about bridging programs, which can range from a couple of months to, in the case of the program that Joanna and I co-lead, to 15 months, they're seemingly very concise programs. And yet, all of our panelists, I think you did a great job of articulating the many complexities leading up to the bridging program, the time in the bridging program, and what comes next. And the fact that I would say we need to take a holistic view towards planning and implementing these programs. So thank you to everybody for your participation. And Arash wants to make an announcement.
Thank you. So I know really related to the last question that Manal had, and I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, so what is the role of students and refugees themselves in supporting with preparation, bridging, advocacy? We have a very exciting session dedicated to the role of students in supporting access to higher education for refugees. That is going to take place at 2:30, just in that building, just across here, Kasha 1. So make sure you attend. It will be a student-led session, which you'll be hearing exactly what are the practical examples that students are taking, what are the initiatives. So don't miss that. But please, again, join me by a big applaud for our panelists before we go into the next one. So we will have another exciting session. The next session will